Welcome. Welcome to the Sophia and Herbert Reuner Library Writer Series at SUNY Ulster. My name is Lorraine Salmon. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation at SUNY Ulster, and we welcome you today. And we couldn't be more excited or proud to be here and to welcome Okey and Ndibe. I practiced. And with that, I'd love to have Dolores Quiles, Professor of English, join us.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ulster. I want to thank again Sophia Reuner because of her contributions to the foundation. We are very pleased to have today Okey in the Bay. And I welcome you all. Today, also, I'm proud to introduce Richard Catabiani, who will be moderating today's author reading. In 1994 and 95, Richard was on a Fulbright scholarship in Leicester, England, a city with the third largest immigrant population in that country. It was here he learned firsthand about African literature. Richard joined SUNY Ulster in 2001, and in 2004 he launched Ulster's international program. In 2007, he secured a Fulbright Scholar and Resident Award to bring literary experts to the college to develop a new course never before taught at the college. The course was and is African literature. Now retired from his administrative duties, we are happy that Richard continues to teach part-time in the English department. And now I'm also proud to introduce our author, Okey Ndibe. Nigerian-born, he is a novelist, memoirist, political commentator, and essayist. He is author of Never Look an American in the Eye, a memoir of flying turtles, colonial ghosts, and the making of a Nigerian American, and the novels Arrows of Rain and Foreign Gods Incorporated. His award-winning journalism has appeared in the New York Times, the BBC, Online, Al Jazeera Online, Financial Times, Fabian Society Journal, and the Nigerian Daily Sun, where his widely syndicated weekly column appears. Ndibe first came to the U.S. to be the founding editor of the African Commentary, a U.S.-based international magazine published by the late great novelist Chinua Achebe. And we are proud. Now let's give him a hand.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to be with us today. I hope you had some time to study some of the slides, which will be shortly turned off. Magic? How do you do that, Chad? It's very important for us to realize that the Federal Republic of Nigeria has more than 500 ethnic groups with varying languages and customs, creating a country of a very rich ethnic diversity. The largest ethnic groups, to my knowledge, are the Hausa, the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the Fulani. There are 521 languages that have been spoken in Nigeria. Some of these ethnic groups speak more than one language, but the one common denominator that I have found, and I would like you to address this, Professor, is the great West African tradition of the griot. Can you kindly tell us about the griot?
Good morning. Oh, you guys are good. Usually when I say good morning to an American audience, they look at me like, who told you that morning was good? So this is really great. So, great questions to start with. The griot tradition, griot is spelled G-R-I-O-T, is such an important tradition, especially in West Africa, countries like Senegal, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Niger. And the griot tradition was sort of the wellspring of memory in pre-colonial societies. In pre-colonial societies, there wasn't the dispersal of written literature that we have today. And so you had sort of griots who were poets. So these were people who were able to tell the stories of generations past and were able to turn these narratives into praise poems, which they performed at different occasions. And so you say that the griots functioned as the memory banks of their societies.
Would it be fair to say that when a griot dies, it is not unlike a library burning down?
Absolutely, that would be correct. When you find somebody who is such a repository of knowledge, for that person to pass away is indeed for an entire anthology of knowledge and of memory to pass away. So that's true.
As you are a trained journalist, would it also be fair to say that there's an element of the griot in your very own work? For example, I'm thinking of the structure of Foreign Gods Incorporated.
Yes. Yeah, well, I see myself, my writing is shaped, informed by two different influences at once, by my investment, my fascination with traditional African, especially traditional Igbo modes of storytelling, modes of orature, and also by my fortune in being exposed to a very Western several Western literary traditions. And so I see myself as a writer, as somebody who participates in that very important, and I would say fundamental actually, in this very fundamental enterprise of ensuring that the memory of a community remains vibrant. And so, for example, in my first novel, Arrows of Rain, there is a line that a story that must be told never forgives silence. And so I see myself as functioning on the basis of that kind of ethical tenet, that it is my place as a writer, as an intellectual, as a storyteller, to ensure that stories are told, so that stories are not besieged by silence, because that then leads to memorylessness, and then to all society basically getting in a bad way quickly.
For those of you who have not read Foreign Gods Incorporated, I would like to tell you that we hear the story of Okey, a rather luckless New York-based Nigerian cab driver who sets out to steal a statue of an ancient deity from his home village and sell it to a New York gallery. We actually meet Okey at the end of his rope. He seems to be fueled by a plan that is quite desperate. And despite having a degree in economics from a major American university, his strong accent barred him from the corporate world and forced Okey to eke out a living as a cab driver. You mentioned in your memoir, Never Look an American in the Eye, about your accent. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it impacted you in this country, please?
Well, first of all, we all have accents, don't we? No, I saw somebody suggesting no. We all have accents. Richard has actually just mentioned the name of the protagonist of my novel, Foreign Gods, Inc. And he's mentioned, perhaps without knowing it, Richard, you've said the name in two different ways. Both names are correct. In fact, I play with the two pronunciations in my novel. So, Igbo language is like many other African languages, that you could have the same spelling, but a slight inflection in pronunciation would determine what you're saying. So, Ike is strength, is power. Ike, slight, can you hear the difference? Ike. So Ike means strength, Ike means your buttocks. And so in a lot of ways, my novel writes on the question. This young man who decides to return to his community to steal what used to be the god of war for his people to sell it to a gallery in New York that vends sacred objects and deities to the rich and powerful, who now collect these gods and sacred objects the same way they collect paintings and sculptures and so on. So my novel raises a question: is he a person of ethical strength, or is he an ass? So if you want to go for a straight distillation of my novel, that would be it. Is he strength or an ass? Yeah, and you call them both names.
We try to cover all the bases. So Igbo names can really play tricks on you.
Absolutely. There is so Ike is just two sort of two meanings. There's a word like AKWA. Okay, if you called it aqua, that would mean bed. If you called it aqua, that would mean egg. If you said aqua, that would mean the clothing that you're wearing. And if you say aqua, that would mean tears. Same spelling, but a slight inflection. So if you went to Nigeria and you learned Igbo, one of the many languages in Nigeria, you could actually be speaking to somebody and you say, Achom aqua. Maybe what you wanted to say is I want an egg, but what you have said is I want a bed, Or you say Achom aqua. I want clothing, and so on. So it's English is actually, in a sense, kind to you, because you sort of, most words would stand for themselves. There are words that are not the same spelling, or words that are the same spelling that have different meanings constantly, and different pronunciations, slightly different, depending on what you want to say. But in Igbo language, it plays tricks on you all the time. Yeah.
The idea that aphorisms, proverbs, maxims, homilies, saws drive the Igbo literature. I'm especially reminded of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, where he actually says proverbs are the palm oil by which words are eaten. Can you talk to us a little bit about how those aphorisms, those anchors in your society drive your work, please?
They are central to the work that I do. They are central. And they are central in two ways. First of all, in my absolute absorption of the kind of writing that you just referred to. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart was one of the first novels that I read that spoke profoundly of my own experience. And so this is a novel, for example, that begins, Okonkwo was well known throughout the 9 villages and even beyond. His fame rested on solid personal achievements. As a young man of 18, he brought honor to his village by throwing Amalinze the cat. Amalinze was a great wrestler who for 7 years was unbeaten from Omofia to Mbano. He was called the cat because his back would never touch the earth. This was the man that Okonkwo threw in a fight which the old men agreed was one of the fiercest since the founder of their town engaged the spirit of the wild for 7 days and 7 nights. So this is the opening paragraph of Things Fall Apart. And when I encountered it in elementary school, first of all, it's a novel that I've read numerous times. But when I first encountered it, it brought the world that was familiar to me to the page. And so it brought my experience into this, what I otherwise had seen up to that point as a remote phenomenon, a phenomenon of literature, say. So Achebe brought it home. But also my storytelling was forged by, again, my attentiveness to the elders. So the elders in my society are often called the owners of words. So it wasn't just that they were exceedingly great storytellers. It was also the style in which they told their stories. It was their shared eloquence, the joy that they radiated as they told the stories. And so you could go to every event, any event, whether it was a wedding, or a funeral, or childbirth, and you sat there. And those events are always mediated by narratives, by storytelling, and the elders, you just will sit and watch them at their craft. And so that worldview is what my art is trying to strain toward. And it is what fertilizes my art.
And you are certainly succeeding, sir.
Oh, you're very kind.
So, nothing occurs in a vacuum.
Yes.
Without the Industrial Revolution, we would not have Charles Dickens. Without World War II, we would not have Joseph Heller and Catch-22. Please tell us how the historical events in Nigeria informed your first novel, Arrows of Rain.
Well, first of all, let me sort of give a broader provenance for Arrows of Rain, my first novel. I became a writer at all by, it was strange. So I came to this country at the invitation of Chinua Achebe to be the founding editor of a magazine that he founded called African Commentary. Then I came, and 2 years later, is a long story, but 2.5 years later, the magazine had to fold because we couldn't get advertising support. And so it came to a moment of despair for me because I had left Nigeria and a very promising career as an editor of a weekly magazine to come to America to found this new publication that received critical acclaim, but we simply didn't have the funds to pull it through. And so I took solace in books. So books became my comfort. I'll go to bookstores and spend all day with a pile of books by the side of the table just reading. And so in the evening, I operated what, if there were Nigerians in the audience, they would understand what 001 or 010 means. Is there anybody who wants to take a guess? It's how many meals I ate in a day. So I'll eat 0 breakfast, 0 lunch, 1 dinner, because I didn't have money, or 0 breakfast, 1 lunch, 0 dinner. So 010, 001, or 100. Usually I'll pass on the first meal. So books became my food, as it were. So one day I was leaving a bookstore and I ran into John Edgar Wideman, who is a fascinating African-American writer and who was one of the columnists for the magazine. So he said to me, now that the magazine has ceased production, what are your plans? I said, I hadn't figured it out. And John Wideman looked me in the face and he said, you must be writing a novel, right? I wasn't writing a novel, but the way he asked the question, I felt the answer better be yes, or he'll never talk to me ever again. So I said yes. And sometimes we amend the truth, I don't quite call it telling a lie, without expecting that there will be any consequence. Well, the guy said to me, get me 15 to 20 pages of your manuscript, and let me see if we can get you into the MFA program at UMass. I said, whoa. So I got home that night, I had to weigh my options. One option was to do nothing, but if I did nothing, then I'll live a hermetic existence. Because John lived in town, in Amherst, Mass, which was where I lived at the time. And so if I was turning a corner, I had to peek out. If I saw John, then I'll run in the other direction. So I came home and began to write feverishly, with desperation, over a long weekend. I produced 23 pages of something that I didn't quite know whether sort of was recognizable as fiction. All I could follow was that I had read widely. So I went to his office and left it. 2 days later, thank God that there were no caller IDs, I would not have picked up my phone. He called and he said, okay, I really loved your manuscript. And he likened it to the writing of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is another fascinating African writer. So that's the beginnings that I lied to be a writer. And once I sat down to write the story, it seemed to me that I wanted to tell a story that would represent sort of a distillation of my understanding of Nigerian history. As Richard said, Nigeria is a country of great complexity and diversity, a country of hundreds of languages and cultures, coupled together by British fiat into a country which Florence Shaw, who was then the girlfriend, who would later become the wife of Frederick Lugard, who became the first British Governor General of this colonial property that Britain owned in West Africa. So Florence Shaw was a columnist for the Times of London. And in 1897, she wrote a column where she proposed that Nigeria be the name of this new possession that the British had acquired. And that became so. If you have a boyfriend in high places, your fancy becomes sort of the destiny of a people. And so I wanted in that novel to look at Nigeria and to say, what does Nigeria mean for me? What is the meaning of this conflation that is absolutely of British design? A country that is still in a lot of ways trying to find its identity and engaged in a tragic drama of understanding itself, of naming itself, of determining the nature of itself.
I want to share with the audience the second sentence after you say, lie about being a writer if you have to, but have the courage, grit, and stamina to turn that lie on its head and make it spell the truth. Any comments on that in general, please?
My comment is that I like that line.
Excellent.
When I tell that story, I tell, especially young writers, I tell them that the moral of the story is, of course, to lie. The moral of the story is that we actually don't know what we know often until we are challenged to dig deep. So I didn't know that in all those years of reading widely, that I had, through a process of osmosis, acquired the technology, the mechanics for putting fiction together. I wasn't aware of that. And I would never have been tempted to become a novelist had the magazine that I come to edit been a success. I would have been content being the editor of a magazine. If anybody said, are you going to write a novel? I said, no, I'm not cut out for it. But here I was desperate, and the writer says to me, you're writing a novel, right? And I acceded to what was false. Then he challenged me to show him, and I had to dig deep. So in a lot of ways then, I learned something about myself, and I proposed this to other writers. When young people say to me, I'd like to be a writer, or even adults, but I can't, I say to them, dig deep. Perhaps you can do it. And it's not just in writing, it's in so many other pursuits that we have.
Another quote before we move to another work. What I know are simple truths. I know that the fabric of memory is reinforced by stories, rent by silences. I know that power dreads memory. I know that memory outlasts power's viciousness. I know that a voiceless man is as good as dead.
Yeah, that's one of the lines in my first novel, Arrows of Rain. And so there's this man who is a madman figure, and he's been accused of being responsible for the death of a prostitute. In a number of prostitutes, bodies of prostitutes have been discovered on a beach in this country. And so the whole question is, what's accounting for that? Is there a serial killer who is targeting prostitutes? And there's international interest, and the state decides that we must solve this crime the way that the state often solves these things. And so they pick up a vagrant madman who lives on the beach, and they say he's the one who's been killing these prostitutes. But in court he makes startling revelations, and he accuses soldiers in this country, because the military head of state is a country under military rule. The military head of state, sort of fearing that the military will become restive, that he could be the victim of a coup d'etat, has actually set up what he calls the vice task force, where he tells soldiers to clear the streets of prostitutes. And he understood that what they were going to do was that they will sweep prostitutes off the streets and take them and rape them. And so, in the process of gang raping the prostitutes, some of them will die, and they will just be abandoned on the beach and so on. So this madman figure then, at his trial, speaks, tells the story that the soldiers are behind the killings, and in fact accuses the president, the military head of state, of complicity in a murder of a prostitute that he knew. And so it's a very frightening story, because as the first time we see the man arrested, we see him looking the part of a madman, but then he begins to tell his story to a journalist who is smuggled into jail where he's being held. And so you begin to see there's actually, he knows what he's talking about. And so those lines for me, I think, are essential, again, point to the absolute ethical duty that we have as enlightened citizens to bear witness. Because it's in telling stories that we reinforce memories. And when we fall silent, then we tear the fabric of memory.
I was very interested that you pair the journalist Femi Aderu, whose job it is, as a journalist, is to seek the truth. And you pair him with an apparent madman whose truth is quite suspect.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes.
Frame that up, please.
Yes. Well, some other important fact is that the madman, it turns out, used to be a journalist himself, and so the novel tells you how he ended up on the beach. And so when he tells his story in court initially, you sort of see the state announced through a psychiatrist who examined him that he's competent to stand trial for this homicide. But when he begins to indict the military and the military head of state of responsibility, of complicity, then they find somebody else, another psychiatrist, who is supposed to go and now determine that he's crazy after all, so don't put any stock by what he says. But things turn, because this man then decides not to suborn his witness, but instead to, at grave risk to himself, to speak the truth. And so he's the one who smuggles this young man, who is also a journalist, who is actually on a quest to discover something about himself. And in listening to the madman, so there's this interesting tension where somebody who is a reporter, but who has a deep emotional wound that he wants to understand, encounters the madman, who begins to tell him his stories. And in a lot of ways they see, or the young journalist sees, a convergence between his story and his journey and the mystery, deep mystery in his life, with the story that the madman is telling him. I dare not say more because I don't want to spoil the fun.
The ending is remarkable.
Oh, thank you.
Just saying.
Yeah.
So, your title, the title of your memoir, Never Look an American in the Eye, Flying Turtles, Colonial Ghosts, and the Making of a Nigerian American. Why should you never look an American in the eye?
Who knows the answer? Anybody in the audience? Nobody has read the book. You know the answer. Good, yeah. It's funny. whenever I travel to give readings and there are Nigerians living in America, they come very helpfully to lecture me. Oh, you got it wrong. Americans want you to look them in the eye. Oh, you have to change the title. So in 1988, Chinua Achebe, the novelist, had invited me to come out to America to be the founding editor of a magazine. And so this was the first visit. I had done visits to a few West African countries. I'd never been outside of West Africa, much less to Europe, much less to America. So this was a major rite of passage then. And so my parents called a feast, as you do on such occasions, to celebrate that milestone, and also to have my uncles and aunts and other people give me advice and in a sense prepare me spiritually for the trip. So I was getting all kinds of advice. And then an uncle, my father's immediate younger brother, said to me, okay, when you get to America, whatever you do, don't look Americans in the eye, because every American carries a gun. And if you look them in the eye, they might think you are being provocative and they will shoot you. So I believe my uncle was an uncle after all. And so I came to America and scrupulously avoided making eye contact, as I spoke to Americans. So if somebody was saying, so how are you finding America? I would either look up, I look sideways, I look to the ground. So I said, well, it's very good. You know, the cold is something, but yeah, I'm having fun, I'm managing that. I never made eye contact. Well, then 13 days after I came here, you want me to go there with the police? Oh, good. So 13 days after I arrived in this country, I was stopped by a police officer. I was at a bus stop, and a police officer had stopped in front of the bus stop because of the traffic light. And so he and I made eye contact, and I quickly averted my gaze because I said, wow, this guy is going to shoot me. Well, the light turned and the officer turned into a side street. I heaved a sigh of relief for a minute or two. Then I felt the pressure of a hand on my shoulder and I whirled around to the side of police uniform. So the officer said to me, sir, do you mind coming to the back of the bus stop? And in Nigeria, the police would not use the language of sir. They would not call you sir, nor would they use do you mind. They will push, shove you, or pull you where they want you. And so for a moment, I thought I had a choice in the matter. That I could say to the officer, I'm in a hurry. You know, I can't meet you today. But on second thought, the officer was so genial that I said I might as well meet him. So I came to the back of the bus stop. And he said to me, sir, you know what this is about, right? Of course, I knew what I had done. I looked him in the eye. But I wasn't going to confess to that because I felt if I confess, this man will have the constitutional right to shoot me. So I denied, and I was ready to deny interminably. Well, finally the officer said to me, there's been a bank robbery and you fit the description. The rest of the story is in my memoir. But, so subsequently I realized that my uncle formed the impression that Americans didn't want you looking them in the eye because my uncle had seen Westerns. The movies will be shown, usually old cowboy movies, black and white affairs, where there was a discrepancy sort of between the movement of the lips and the sound of the voice. Very old movies. There were communal events that will be shown in a football field, football as in soccer in those days. And so everybody will gather, you know, in the community at night to watch these things. We couldn't understand the language, but at some pivotal point in the movie, the cowboys would gather together in the huddle together, meet in the center of a bar, usually. They exchange a few words, then stare each other down, and then pull guns from both sides of the hip and start shooting. Because what preceded the shootout was a stare down, my uncle then felt that to look somebody in the eye was a capital offense in America. Hence the advice, never look an American in the eye. So that's why I'm not looking any of you in the eye, guys.
would you like to read a selection from any of your novels? Which one would you prefer, sir? I have 3 right here.
You have, oh my gosh, this guy has my books. Okay, let me read from Foreign Gods, Inc. I hope I made the right choice. Okay. What I would have read to you was, what I would have read otherwise was the fit in the description section. But this is sort of a set piece in the novel, which is about a gallery in New York, hence the title Foreign Gods Incorporated, a gallery in Manhattan that buys and sells secret objects and so on. And so this is a moment where a missionary has arrived in Okey, the community where this day is stolen from. And he's talking to them about this invisible God, you know, the Christian God that is invisible, is everywhere, and so on and so forth. So there's a kind of quasi-theological debate between him, through an interpreter, and some of the converts. How much time do we have?
As much as you can.
All right.
Enjoy
Okay, guys,
yourself.
you are here all day. Sometimes the converts voice their doubts. One day the interpreter said the new God's Father lived up in the sky, far beyond the clouds, beyond the reach of eyes. He said this divine Father was so huge, his feet lolled all the way down from the sky to rest on the earth. He then claimed that the missionaries' God was present everywhere. Our people too have Chukwu, the great God who lives in the sky, one baffled convert said. Everywhere we see the signs of his work. The drifting clouds are smoke from his pipe. Rainfall is his sneeze. All great rivers were born from his spittle. Wherever he scuffed his feet, mountains arose. Valleys were formed wherever he stamped his feet. Chukwu is mighty, but we never say that he's everywhere. His home is in the sky, and he hardly leaves his hearth to visit the earth. He comes down to peer around only when something big happens in the world. And when he comes, nobody waits to be told. New mountains, valleys, and rivers are born. The earth shakes with rain, the like of which is seen only in ages. If your own God lives everywhere, then why haven't my 2 eyes seen him? The interpreter explained the parley to the chief missionary, Mr. John Stanton, an Englishman. It's because the true and living God is invisible, Stanton explained. For a moment, the curious convert was silent, but his face wore an incredulous expression. How can something be everywhere and yet invisible, he asked finally. He is creator and maker of everything. With him, everything is possible. He can do and undo, explained the missionary. Then he should do to make himself visible, the convert suggested. Why not tell him to appear to us in his body? Then all of our brothers and sisters will leave their ways and come follow him. We can't tell God what to do. I'm not saying tell him. Take a sacrifice to him and beg him, said the convert. It is through sacrifice that gods are deceived. Our God cannot be deceived, Stanton explained with visible impatience. He knows everything, including the secrets of our hearts. You deceive your own so-called gods because they are not gods at all, only phantoms. True Christians accept God's wisdom. It is not given to us to behold God in body only, a spirit. Ngene too. Ngene is a deity that this young man goes to steal finally. Ngene too is a spirit, but he also has a body, insisted the convert. Its spirit is buried in the river, but you can see his body at the shrine. Stanton scratched at his neck, leaving splashes of reddened skin. His words tumbled out fast. What you call Ngene is nothing. It's a lie with which you've imprisoned yourself. It doesn't live in the river, nor does it own the river. Our God owns everything. He made your river and also the wood Ngene was carved from. The convert's face showed confusion. All these years, our fathers and forefathers made sacrifice to Ngene. They gave it cocoyam and yam. They offered it chicken and goat. In fact, when their hands were strong with wealth, they brought cows to his shrine. When their wives had new babies, or when their farms had increased, they went to the shrine to say Dalo, which is the Igbo word for thank you, Dalo to Ngene. We too learn to do like our fathers and forefathers. As soon as we stopped suckling our mother's breast, we were taught the secrets of the river. We learned that the river belongs to Ngene, that the God Spirit lives in that river. Are you saying then that Ngene stole the river from your God? If the river belonged to your God all along, why didn't he send a diviner to tell our forefathers and us about it? That's why we're here. We've come to tell you about the God who made all things. We brought you the good news of the one true indivisible God. We're here to spread the word about he who alone sits on the mantle of glory. I still have one question that scratches my inside, the inquisitive convert said with a mischievous glint in his eye. Ask it, the missionary invited eagerly. Does your God owe money to another God? Perplexed, Stanton asked, what do you mean? I still don't understand why your God likes to be invisible. Around here, those who take to hiding are men who do not want to pay their debts. An edge of exasperation nudged away Stanton's eager expression. Fixing the interpreter with a glare, he spoke in a slow, halting manner. Tell them to get it into their thick heads, once and for all, that there aren't other gods besides the one true God. Tell them that our God can't owe anybody because he owns everything in heaven and on earth. Tell them that he is invisible because he is holy. Tell them that we are all tainted sinners corrupted by the original sin of our first parents, Adam and Eve, who ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. Tell them that because all have sinned and come up short, our eyes can see God in flesh and blood. Tell them that nobody who beholds God can live to tell about it. Tell them, finally, that there will be no more questions today. Thank you.
The awful dichotomy of animism, pantheism, and as Chinua Achebe reminds us in Things Fall Apart, that the new religion was like a dog that ate excrement, meaning the Christian missionaries, both Mr. Smith and Mr. Brown. Having said that, I would like to, you tell a story when you called your mother on the phone and told her about being sworn in as an American in 1995. She paused and she asked in an anxious tone, why? I wonder if the concern was you're losing your Nigerianness, as you also referred to harmonious hyphenation. Could you talk a little bit about the difficulty of
animism and pantheism and the superimposition on Christianity? Please.
Well, in Achebe and also in my novel, you see that when the Christians came, part of what accounted for the success of their missionary work was that in a lot of ways the message they brought was already was coherent to the Igbo, because the Igbo have a sense of what they call Chukwu, the big God, the God that lives in the sky. So when the missionaries talked about the supreme God, the Igbo were open. So in Tenswell Apart, you see a moment where there is that debate between Mr. Brown and a titled man. And so Mr. Brown is saying, we have the one God. And, the titled man say, we call him Chukwu. And, Mr. Brown is saying, no, it's not quite the same. Your Chukwu is different. And so on. So on the one hand, so the Igbo were open to that conversation because they already had an idea of the one God. The supreme God. But the Igbo also were a deeply Republican people, Republican with a small letter R. I hope that people know that Republican means deeply democratic. That's the sort of the irony in this country, so that to be Republican is to believe deeply in a democratic ethos and so on. And so the Igbo are a particular exemplar of that worldview. That when decisions are made, everybody in the community attends a meeting in the public square and has a voice. And the Igbo related with their gods in the same democratic spirit. So apart from Chukwu, the God up in the sky, the great God, and Allah, which means the earth, which is a female deity, the Igbo would actually bring gods into being, create gods. So humans created gods to serve certain functions and certain offices. So if an Igbo community in Ulster, say, wanted to have a huge mall, the best mall in the area, that would draw people from all over the place, they will create a god of commerce that is supposed to serve that end. If some families felt that the birth rate was falling, you created a god of fertility to serve the end of fertilizing the womb so that the procreative process continues to go on. So the Igbo created their gods. And because they created their gods, they could also kill off their gods. And they killed off their gods in two ways. They killed off their gods by withholding devotion. Gods, like humans, need food. That's why you sacrifice, to gods. If you withheld sacrifice, it's assumed that these gods will die. But in extreme cases, you took gods, the statue representing a god, to the boundary, which happens in Things Fall Apart, which happens in my novel, to a boundary between the community and another, and you set it on fire. You could destroy gods and so on. So, but sort of to go, so my parents became converts to Catholicism, and so we were raised Catholic. But when I called my mother in 1996, May, to say I'd become an American citizen, she said, why? She was really thoroughly frightened because for her it seemed as if in becoming American, I was rejecting what it meant to be Hassan, what it meant to be Nigerian, what it meant to be Igbo. But then I saw it in a different way, even though I haven't altogether resolved the question, the answer to that question, why. But one provisional way that I have resolved it is that for me, becoming an American was not a renunciation of my Nigerianness, of my Igbo-ness, of my Ndibe-ness. That I brought the two, all the strands of my identities into what I call a kind of kind of fruitful and cordial hyphenation, you know. So when people say to me, how do you see yourself? I don't see myself in one way. I see myself in so many different ways. And I take the best that America has to offer. I give America the best that I can offer, that I brought with me. I take the best they have to offer. And I think it's made me a much richer person.
We're going to have another question and then open it up for questions to the audience, because I believe we are close. And I'm going to ask you a rather serious question as opposed to what's in the name.
Yeah.
You can share that. If you could write the history of Nigeria for a Western audience, what central points would be in your narrative?
Well, it would be important for an American audience to understand, so have kind of the code for understanding how complex a place like Nigeria is. So we have words like violence and corruption and, you know, religious extremism and so on and so forth that are bandied, you know. So if you think about Nigeria, or if you think about any other African country in the Western space, the narrative is one where the Nigeria of the African country represents the jungle. You know, so if I say to any Americans, what do you think about when Africa is mentioned? They say animals. So it's as if the human population is incidental and marginal to the narrative. So I say, first of all, to restore the essential humanity and the complexity of that humanity at the center of that narrative. But also that it's important that you recognize the artificiality of this construct that we call Nigeria, because the British put together Nigeria for their designs. They were not creating a nation. The British were in a scramble like other European powers as the Industrial Revolution was taking root in Europe, and these European powers wanted huge markets in Africa as well as huge sources of raw material. So the British were able to couple together these 500 plus different cultures and ethnicities without seeking their consent, their volition, their expression of will. It was an imposition. They said you must live together. And so they have brought into this space people from disparate cultures. And in fact, once that space was created, the British took active steps to ensure that there was no cohesion. They instead engaged in the division of the different groups, because that was what enabled the British to rule for so long, and still enables them to maintain an inordinate influence even today in the affairs of Nigeria. So all of that. So when a Nigerian, for example, Nigerian president, governor steals the resources of his state or of the country, part of what explains it, apart from this normal greed that human beings can do things if they can get away with it, okay? But part of what explains this is that the act of stealing from one's country, when your country is false, is actually seen as a heroic act because of the falsity of the construct of the country. And so, so when you see some Nigerians defend fiercely a president who was stealing resources, or a governor, a minister in the government who was stealing huge amounts of money because this person belongs to their religious group, or belongs to their state, or belongs to their ethnicity, you must understand it as not that they are necessarily all for stealing, but Nigeria is false to them. So Nigeria becomes a convenient place where if you find some money, you pick it. You know, so the land is what comes across as no man's land. So what I like to do is also to let the Western audience understand that that corruption began by the British. The British stole the resources of Nigeria in the name of the crown. Then the Nigerians took over and they are stealing the resources of the country in their personal names and in the name of their ethnicity. Even though they don't share the money, they steal with members of the ethnic group. The other thing is that there are a Nigerian musician, Fela Anikulapo Kuti, said that Africans did not create the word embezzlement. They didn't create the word fraud and so on. These are actually phrases for him that sort of mitigate the gravity of stealing. Africans know Izuori, to steal. And when you say to people, somebody has stolen, they are outraged. When you say somebody has committed fraud, it looks fanciful and sexy. If you say somebody has embezzled funds, you know, yeah, it's fanciful. Or if you say somebody has engaged in money laundering, it actually looks, well, there should be a money laundering derby. See? So to call it, strip it of this affectation and of this sexiness and just call it stealing. Once you name it that, people say, no, don't accept stealing. And so on. I'll tell one more story. If you read King Lepel's Ghost, very important book, and it tells the story of King Lepel II of Belgium, who at one point owned the Congo, the entire country of the Congo, which is several times his country, the kingdom that he governed. He owned it personally, not in the name of the Congo. In the end, he transferred the country, Congo, to Belgium because of human rights abuses that were just scandalous. But he set rubber production quotas for Congolese. And if you didn't meet your rubber production quota, the punishment was the amputation of a limb. Then the following year, you had to meet the previous year's quota plus the current year's quota. If you failed to meet it, another limb was cut. So there were people who became stumps because they, from year to year, and then your legs will be cut. So a few years ago, Fode Sanka, military rebel, took to the forest in Sierra Leone trying to liberate the people and the country so that he'll rule the country. And every village that he overran, he'll gather the people, children, men, women, and cut off their limbs. And says, this is a way to show that he's in control here. You know, this is his territory. And so people were horrified. And in the papers they were speaking about this savagery as a uniquely African phenomenon. But then you read Adam Huschel's King Lepel's Ghost, and you find out that the European thought for the Sanko everything he knows about the amputation of limbs. So the African is not exceptional, neither in his humanity nor in his criminality. That's what I would like my American audience to understand.
Thank you. We have some time for a question or two from the audience, but please, could you show your appreciation? My understanding is it's about 11:15, and I don't know how much time we have left. 10 minutes. Chad will bring the microphone to you if you have a question, please. Dr. McCall, nice to see you, Tom.
I'm not sure I need the mic.
Oh, sing a little bit when you get the mic.
Thank you very much for your comments. My question is about thinking and writing. And I understand that most people think in their original language. So I'm assuming that you think in Igbo and you write these novels in English. Is there some type of a conflict there between the two?
There's actually no conflict. I think both in Igbo and in English. When I'm in Nigeria and amongst my Igbo people, when I'm in my village, I speak mostly Igbo. And so I think in it, and I speak in it, and I scribble occasionally in Igbo. When I'm with Americans, because from a very early age, as Richard pointed out, Nigeria has so many hundreds of languages. So English is actually the language of education from the very early age. And in schools, at one point in schools, certainly when I went to school, there was this something perverse that when you spoke what was called vernacular, which was your native language, you were punished. So we were supposed to express ourselves in English, you see. And so the vernacular language became a language that marked you out because we were being rehearsed for this elite status. You know, we were supposed to be able to be people of the world and so on and so forth. Without understanding that you are most deeply a person of the world when you are deeply, you know, in your culture, in your, in who you are. But part of who I am is, you know, I'm a subject, you know, of this country that Britain threw together, a country that had English as this bequest of the English and of an educational system and an entire economy of, you know, infrastructure and so on. So there isn't that there are some Igbo concepts and words that I don't find, or Igbo expressions. You talked about proverbs, you know. So there are some Igbo proverbs that I have no way of translating into English because it won't make sense. That is where, and I like to use proverbs a lot. Some of them I can translate, some of them I can't. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Professor. Another question, please. Excellent.
Hi, thank you. So one of your goals when writing is to preserve cultural memory. Right now, I think we're experiencing more than ever the impulse to reinvestigate our cultural memory, to reinterpret our literary canon because of harmful belief systems that underlie them. So my question is, what do you do when you're faced with a rich canon that also has considerable flaws? And is it possible to preserve your origins while also diverging from them? Or are those two actions at odds with each other?
No, the two options are the two are not at odds. I think that again, when we talk about culture, you know, there is no fixity, there is nothing immutable and fixed about culture, and so we live out our culture every day, and our culture, you know, is participating in the process of accretion. Right? So I came to America and I began to eat some American cuisine in addition to my Nigerian cuisine and my interpretation of what I ate in Nigeria. You know, I love to cook, for example. So, but when I go home to my hometown, I say to my mother, "Let me cook," and she laughs me out of the kitchen. She says, "Go sit down. We'll make food and give it to you." And a cousin of mine came to visit me in Las Vegas last year. I spent a year in Las Vegas and I cooked some Nigerian Igbo delicacy, and he enjoyed it, but he said it's not quite the same way that it's made back in Nigeria. I said, yeah, this is my interpretation. So for me, this is the same. I'm participating in cultural translation and transformation and so on. And so yes, you come to difficult moments. So if I say to you, for example, that I cook, I've been lectured. My wife came to visit me in Las Vegas and I was whipping up breakfast for her. And a guy in Nigeria began to lecture me, say, "You stayed too long in America, men don't cook. You got to go back to Nigeria." And he was serious, and he carried on this debate with me and with other people for a long time. So the fact that I cook says that I'm saying, no, cooking is not something that belongs to the female domain. I love cooking. A man must cook, and so on. So one begins to interrogate and to question and to destabilize and to deconstruct all those patriarchy. It's offensive. I have a daughter. I call her my favorite daughter because she's the only one. Yeah, but you know, for me, I have two sons. There is no privileges that my sons have that my daughter doesn't have. and there is no expectations that I have of the boys that I don't have of my favorite daughter, and so on. So I am aware quickly of certain cultural missteps, and I cannot, if I'm a conscious, enlightened person, I cannot reproduce them. In fact, I cannot be indifferent to them. I must confront and oppose them.
I think that's a perfect example of the notion of harmonic hyphenation.
That's right. That's right. He's great.
One more question before people have to absquatulate and go to class.
So, with all the incredible diversity from Nigeria, and then your own identity as Igbo, how do the other cultures in Nigeria look at you, or how do they identify with you, you know, from that very specific culture to the sort of larger sense that, you know, you're a citizen of the world, you're bringing Nigeria into, you know, a larger arena?
So my wife is Yoruba. So in Nigeria there are three big ethnic groups: Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa. And I see myself, there is a kind of triangulation in my identity because I was born in the north, which is Hausa territory. Then I went to school in the southeast, which is Igbo, my sort of natal, my parents' natal home. That's high school. And I went to college in Lagos, and then I'm married to a Yoruba woman who is southwestern. And so Nigeria is very tricky. So I've been writing, I wrote a weekly column for a Nigerian paper from 1999. I just stopped in March because I'm wrestling with 2 books at the moment. And I said, let me leave journalism alone for a bit. But then my columns are unsparing of corruption in the country, which is part of why the government has been arresting me, put me on a list of enemies of the Nigerian state. But sometimes when I criticize a corrupt Yoruba politician from my wife's, people just from his ethnic group will come and savage me and say, it's because you are Igbo, you know, you are attacking him, not because you are fundamentally opposed to corruption, but because he's Yoruba and he's the one who stole and you are Igbo. If you were Igbo, you would not attack him. Then I attack an Igbo person, and Igbos will say you should be ashamed of yourself for attacking your own. So it's very interesting. And then sometimes I take positions, and Yoruba people find that I'm married to a Yoruba woman, and suddenly they see my position in a new light. Oh, if he's broad-minded enough to marry a Yoruba person, maybe we should give him a second look. And of course, the Igbo find out that I'm married to a Yoruba person, then it confirms that I'm a traitor. Because I had the choice to take a wife from my own ethnicity, but I've always had this outsider streak in me. And I have a column which I call Toward an Ethnicity of Values. I say to people, the person who belongs to my ethnic group is a person who shares my values, period. Period.
I think we should give Professor Ndibe a round of applause. Once again, one more round of applause. Thank you very much for coming. And don't forget, there will be a book signing as well as a goal to purchase these remarkable novels. Thank you very much.